Good evening. Welcome to Red, White, and Blue. I am standing in tonight for Gary Polland, and so I have my work cut out for me dealing with my co-host, David Jones.
Oop.
And tonight we have a very, very interesting topic. It is the state of energy. We have a fabulous panel of guests. First, we have with us Mr. Michael Skelly. Michael is the president of Clean Line Energy Partners. We also have with us Maynard Holt. Maynard is the CEO of Tudor, Pickering, Holt Company. Welcome, Maynard. We also have with us from the University of Houston, the Chief Engineering Officer, Dr. Ramanan Krishnamoorti. Doctor, thank you for being with us too.
Thank you for having me.
And thank you for getting that name right.
I practiced.
So let's go around the table, because you know this is a serious subject matter that we're going to be talking about, and yet you deal with complexities that this lawyer and I will never touch. So do your best to explain to the viewers what it is you do, Mr. Skelly, and how long you've been doing it, and is there anything getting in your way?
Yeah. So I've been knocking around renewable energy for about 20 years now. Was originally on the generation side, developing and building wind energy projects around the United States. And over the last 8 years, our company, Clean Line Energy, has been developing very long distance, very high voltage transmission lines to move energy from places where you have fantastic renewable resources to major load centers. So we're in in oil and gas, we're like the midstream folks, but in the electric power world. And so what that involves is going through all the permitting, acquiring rights of way, doing all the technical studies, and then lining up contracts with people who want to use our services to get their electricity to market, and people who want electricity to buy from them.
I hope this is not a dumb question, but do you really have to be in locations where there's lots of wind in order for this to work?
You do. As you know from driving your car, the faster you go, the lower your mileage gets. That's because the cube of the amount of energy in the wind increases with the cube of the velocity. So if you're in a really windy place in Oklahoma, you will have 3 times as much wind as a place with a wind speed of that's half. So it's
and how much lower is the electricity in those parts of Oklahoma where you're most active?
So generally, the state of play on wind in Texas or Oklahoma, the windy parts of the United States, you can generate electric power for without any subsidies around 3 cents a kilowatt hour. Right now, there are tax credits in place which are being phased out over the next 5 years, and with those credits in place, the production cost is around $0.015. So it's remarkably.
I'm paying a whole lot more than that.
Well, you're paying because you need a grid. You need a distribution system. You need reliability. You need a whole fleet to make sure that you have very high reliability service.
And Mr. Holt, are you helping him at all in doing any of these things?
Well, love Michael. Not really.
Yeah, really.
We're our firm, so we're about 200 people, most of which are in Houston, but we're also in Denver and in Calgary. And New York and London, I don't want to leave those out, but we're largely a North American energy advisory firm. So the advice usually is with companies or private investors, private equity, or on the research side of our house, our guys cover about 150 energy stocks. So a lot of the local names that you would know, Anadarko, Exxon, et cetera. And so they write on those stocks and they tell investors, what they think of them, whether or not they think they should buy them. But we're largely tied to oil and gas. So upstream, midstream, oilfield services. And within that, of course, the North American story has been shale. And so the percentage of our business that is at some level related to shale is extremely high. I think the part of our business that is going Michael's direction is there is a real push right now for getting more technology into the oil and gas business. And that means lots and lots of things. It could mean data, it could mean software, it could mean new technologies around water, so on and so forth. But our business, that's a big part of our business, watching that, advising on that, helping companies understand that, helping investors understand that. And eventually that space will connect with the renewable space. We could get to this later in the show, but we're a traditional, the energy, part of the energy spectrum, when you think about energy, the 95+% of the energy we're all using, that's where we sit.
Yeah.
He sits in the revolution, you know, I sit in the existing
Well,
space.
so the neutral part here has to be the academic side.
So we're not just neutral. We're agnostic, but we care about energy.
Okay, well let
And
me just put it to you this way. A fellow named Brett Pearlman, who used to be on the Public Utility Commission and appointed by George W. Bush, now CEO for the Center for Houston's Future, says that we are in a major transition, sadly for you, from a fossil fuel economy to a low carbon one. And according to Brookings, which he cites in a report, the venture capital distributions over the last 5 years, 56% have gone to Silicon Valley for clean energy technology and research. So what are we doing right or wrong so that we're missing out on this investment opportunity?
So the thing that Brett leaves out is
Oh, you call him his first name.
So I know Brett. And
Oh man, I knew I was in trouble.
Is Brett going to see this show?
I'd love for him to to watch the show, but he hasn't answered the most important question, which is when. And that is really the crux of the issue. It's not if. The transition is going to happen. We all anticipate that over the next 100 years, we will move to a low carbon environment for energy production around the world. But it's a matter of when are those tipping points going to happen. And unfortunately, I don't think any one of us knows when those tipping points are going to happen. But I think this city, the infrastructure around the city, the money around the city is ready for this transition. I don't think we are anywhere, we've got anything to scorn the city and where the state is going with energy. We look at energy as a commodity, as a means to an end, and that end is economic prosperity for all of us. And I think that's where the university steps in as a player, and that is to have the workforce to look at energy as a vital commodity to improve the lifestyle of humanity in the broadest sense that you can think about.
Well, so we should invite you back in 50 years, or do we have to wait 100?
I think you got to keep watching. I think the point is that you have to keep watching. You have to look for the tipping points, and it's a matter. And oil and gas is not going away, no matter what anybody tells you. Over the next 50 years, every prediction is going to tell you that you're going to be using at least 75% of all your energy from fossil fuels.
Yeah, let me just offer this point on that. So this notion that Silicon Valley is going to beat Houston is underlying that premise is that Silicon Valley is actually really good at making small things even smaller and small things do more work. And in energy, both on the oil and gas side and on the renewable side, what energy is all about is gathering up very dispersed, fairly low-grade forms of energy. Sunshine and wind, these are fairly gentle forms of energy. So you need massive gathering apparatus to grab that energy, and then you need the infrastructure to move it. So if you think of this in infrastructure terms and not in purely, sort of technology terms, Houston is actually in a pretty good position for deployment, okay? And that's why you have a company like Quanta Services, leading pipeline builder and leading transmission builder right here in the Galleria. And that's why a company, like if we were starting afresh, Houston actually makes a lot of sense for us because you've got engineers, you've got lawyers, you've got right-of-way agents, you've got construction companies, et cetera, et cetera. So if you look at energy from an infrastructure perspective, Houston is it's not perfect, but it's in a pretty good position.
Well, let me ask you this, because you're obviously wind energy is your thing. How has the low price of oil and gas impacted the wind energy market?
Yeah. So what affects us is natural gas, not so much oil. We don't use hardly any oil to create electricity. What we do use is natural gas, and what the shale revolution has done on the wind and solar side is really lit a fire under us to get costs down. And what you've seen on the wind side in the last 6 years, you've seen cost reductions on the order of 50%. And on the solar side, they're more like 70, 75%. So just as everybody is competing really hard in the gas sector, on the wind and solar side, we've got to work just as hard.
Hey, let me ask you this. Given, again, the price of oil and gas as it currently stands, what is the future of fracking?
I think the future of fracking is very bright. I mean, this is what I think is interesting. Part of what we're doing here is we're talking about what the energy complex might look like, right? Imagine if we were having this show 10 years ago. That's not long in, geologic time, right? And 10 years ago, we maybe had the Barnett Shale. That was about it. Gas prices, meaning natural gas prices, were, I don't know, $8 to $10, right? They were 4 to 5 times what they are. So the United States, in 10 years, has gone from being short natural gas and a place that manufacturers and chemical companies didn't want to be located because the gas costs were high, to being a place with the cheapest natural gas on the planet, where manufacturing, petrochemical, and all that stuff is coming back to the United States. So the whole landscape was changed dramatically. So I guess my point is, it is really hard to predict this landscape, right? Because look at what just happened to us. None of us, it was every person to a person in 2007 would have told you the United States is short natural gas, right? And so we've totally changed that. I think when I visit with global energy companies, the attractiveness of North America as a place to produce oil and gas is doing nothing but going up and up and up. Because when you take a step back, because of fracking, this is why I have confidence in fracking, you take a step back, if you can earn, let's just draw out some numbers. Imagine you're an executive and you're trying to make a decision. You can earn 30, 40, 50% at the project level drilling for oil and gas in North America. Okay, now contrast that to going to Latin America, Africa, Russia, pick a place where there are a lot more risks, right? So North America as a place that is drawing capital, that's going up. And the only reason that's happening is because of fracking.
And that's a great question or great point.
Fracking and horizontal drilling and all the technology that goes with it.
And our goal, obviously, is to be, as a country, energy independent, correct? And so, given that we now have certain technologies that we didn't have, say, 20 years ago, fracking specifically, have we opened up a new pool of resources that allow us to be energy independent without alternative fuel sources?
And fracking can't be separated from the price of at the pump, right? I mean, you can frack all you want to if you've got a glut. I mean, nobody's going to frack.
Well, yeah, I think so. There was a lot in there. I think this question, on the Silicon Valley versus Houston is really it's not the way it's going to shake out. The way it's going to shake out, at least the way we feel it right now, is Silicon Valley and Houston are going to team up. Okay, because Silicon Valley has a lot of great stuff. They got a lot of data. They got a lot of processes. They got a lot of information technology, a lot of things that streamline, the Amazon effect, if you will. Well, Houston and Midland and Oklahoma and all the traditional oil and gas places, they have fracking, they have horizontal drilling, they have all the entrepreneurial spirit that created all of this production. So we see those things coming together, and you could see a near-term future where things are going to get more efficient. Like, we're going to find how to do things a lot cheaper. Like, that's been the story. Like, I think that's why it's worth pausing on what happened in the last 10 years. U.S. oil production was dead, right? The U.S. has added more incremental new production than any other country on the planet. So the probability that U.S. technology from both tech firms, oil and gas firms, et cetera, that it continues to create great innovation, that's pretty high.
Let me ask Dr. Krishnamoorti, whether or not he can tell us a couple of things. One is whether or not students are aligning themselves in their choices for study that would indicate they're supportive of one line of thought regarding energy production than another. And secondly, I was going to ask you to react to this reporter for the Chronicle who says that Houston has lost more, Houston's lost 100,000 oil and gas jobs. The oil price is down 50% since 2014. 40 plus Texas oil and gas companies are in bankruptcy, another 75 on edge. Do we have any choice but to look for alternatives to fossil fuels?
So our university students are very savvy, right? They don't look at this as a training for a job. They're looking at their education as a means to build a career, and so they pick very carefully what they're going to study, what they're going to work on. But certainly, being in Houston, they earn their stripes mostly through the oil and gas industry, whether they're engineers, whether they're finance students, whether they're economic students, and they've really they've built their careers, they built their educational careers based on the oil and gas industry, and that continues to happen today. We have not seen a significant shift in that, but clearly our students are also learning across the value chain what is energy, what does it mean, where does it come from, and they're pretty agnostic to where it comes from in the end. They see it as a career path. So for the first part of that, it's a very, very clear choice. But I think in terms of looking at employment in the oil and gas industry, the industry has rebounded significantly over the last 3 years or so. But we don't expect to see the same levels of jobs as they had pre-2014, and that's largely because of the technology, data analytics, technology, and robotics, automation and robotics, largely driving towards safe operations of oil and gas is what is driving the jobs. And I think you're going to see that. The industry is going to be leaner for longer, no matter what it is in terms of the price of oil. But we anticipate that our students are going to be transforming with time. And so, for instance, the hardest thing that's going on at the university right now is data sciences. Every single student wants to learn about data sciences, how it gets applied to the energy industry.
I knew there was a subject in college I should have taken.
Now, and for those who are listening who don't know what that area is, tell us what it is.
So it's about bringing all the things that we've done with the digital transformation, about how you can get a lot of data, but the hard part is we don't know what to do with the data. How do we make physical decisions using that data? And that's what we're training our students today. How do you
need those kids?
Exactly. So we all need those kids, and that's exactly what we're training them to do. Is how do you make sensible business, technology, and engineering decisions based on data rather than based on the way the wind is blowing? And so it's a transformation.
What do you see as some of the biggest energy challenges Houston will face in the next decade or so?
And offer a rebuttal to those horrible statistics I gave.
I think those statistics, were off an absolute peak, right? You said from 2014, oil's down this much, jobs are down this much, so on and so forth. But if you go back to 2000, let's say 12, and you measure it to today, you'd be saying up this much, up this much, up this much, up this much. So it's, that's from the peak. And the blessing that energy has been to Texas more broadly in terms of jobs is stunning. Sure. And not just jobs for college graduates and graduate degree people, but people with high school educations who can make $100,000 driving a truck. That's fantastic. And that, so the quality contribution that energy has made, I think, is just, you can't debate it. And so those figures are a little bit manufactured. I think for us, what's interesting, when the world really gets solar, really gets wind, really gets fuel cells, really gets whatever is to come, if I was a betting man, I would say energy companies will be leading that charge. Mm-hmm. So it won't be outside the industry guys. It's very likely to come from the energy community.
Right. So you know, as Maynard pointed out, if we were on this panel 10 years ago, we would all have been so utterly wrong. But we might have said 10 years ago, or Maynard, you might have said 10 years ago, hey, keep an eye on shale gas, because that could be interesting. So it's interesting to think, what do you want to keep an eye on over the next decade? And among other things are electrification of the motor vehicle fleet. And a number of countries in Europe have said we're going all electric. A number of automakers have said we're going all electric. China has said that's the direction they're going to go in. That's probably good for natural gas, because we use a lot of gas to generate electric power. Probably not so good for oil. And it's definitely good for electricity and renewable energy. That's a big thing to keep an eye on. As a city, you know, we need to think about what sort of infrastructure are we building, and are we thinking about all these revolutions coming down the pike in terms of transportation. And the other thing that this is real from sort of the natural gas perspective, you won't see another pipeline built to California, probably ever, because California has said they're going to go 100% renewable energy. So that means they'll need a very different electric grid, and they will need gas pipes for heating and other things, but they won't use them as much for electricity. And California is one of these places where they will say, in a way that some European countries do this is so important to us that we'll do this and send us the bill as it comes in. And that's that's not the biggest power market in the country or fossil fuel market in the country, but it's not immaterial. That's another thing for us to sort of keep an eye on.
Let's also talk about the role of government that has recently changed significantly in many areas, and I'll just mention three. As I understand it, clean energy development was either subsidized or relied on the research of the Department of Energy for a good while. I don't have percentages of that. Donald Trump has just eliminated from his budget anything that the Department of Energy does in terms of funding research.
Yeah, most of that research is done by the private sector, so that doesn't really. It's the basic stuff is important, but it's the federal investment in R&D is very small. So they could stop. You know, as you know, the federal government invested for decades in the development of fracking technology, but after a while, all that R&D was dramatically eclipsed by everything done on the private side.
We also have the Paris Accord, which now has only the United States and Syria that is not signed on to it. We collected 60% less penalties from polluters through July 31st than the three previous administrations during the same period. The head of EPA has stripped scientists and academics of advisory positions for the agency, barring experts in toxicology, epidemiology, and other advisory agencies from one of the largest funders of environmental research. They're now been banned from his agency. So I'm just wondering whether or not government is now playing a different role than it ever has in your field.
Well, I mean, so the interesting backdrop to all that is what country has reduced its emissions more than any in the last 20 years? It's the U.S. Okay, and why'd that happen? It happened, ironically, because of shale and fracking and more natural gas, and that made it possible to get away from coal, whether you regulated it away or whether it just economically didn't make sense anymore. So, I mean, my own perspective on government is the best thing it can do is demand a clean environment. It can say, you can use wind, you can use natural gas, you can do whatever it is, but it has to be clean, right? And then let the private sector figure out what's the most economic way to do that. I think when we get in trouble is when people, it would be wrong for someone to say, okay, oil is the way, wind is the way, solar is the way. Don't choose, put down the barriers around what we want from our environment, and then let the market decide.
I think if they start to pick winners and losers, then you have an issue to deal with. Right now, the business has spoken, and natural gas has taken over, and coal has been left behind. The one place where the lack of action is going to have an impact on us is where nuclear power goes. The business itself is in trouble in the United States. Business as usual is not going to work. A lot of the older nuclear reactors are going away, they're being retired, and the newer ones are not coming online. And that is going to be a place where we're going to lose a lot of baseload power. So hopefully, with the renewables coming online, and if we can find a good way to store that power, store that energy, it's going to be, nuclear's absence is not going to be felt. But that's the one place where the previous administration had played a role in propping up nuclear, finding ways to advance it. That absence of support is going to be felt. But coal is in trouble no matter what. And natural gas is sort of leading that way.
So, you know, we don't have but a few 30 seconds or so. I just want to know when and if you happen to know when I'm going to be able to afford a Tesla.
Well, I'm talking to your boss to understand that.
I mean, you know,
Yeah.
When
Well,
is it
I don't
gonna be?
know. I don't know,
I'm
but
gonna
you
have to ask
could.
for a raise.
You
A
might
lot
be able
more
to.
shows from now.
You might be able to afford a Chevy Bolt, which is 250 miles. It's like $35,000. You know,
that's my range.
yeah. Okay. So
And the Model 3 will come out sooner rather than later. They're in trouble right now, but they'll come out with that car.
Thank you all three for being here.
Thank you
Great
so much.
discussion.
Thank you.
I've learned something. And
Likewise.
join us next week for another Red, White, and Blue.